Now, I've been asked a few questions earlier about, what do we do? The provisions for U.S. tax compliance, I regret to say, is far more complicated for citizens of the United States living outside the U.S. than it is for citizens living in the U.S. It's a practical problem. But all provisions of the Internal Revenue Code apply. So, for example, they're going to affect people differently. Gifts from foreign persons or corporations. If your mother is not a U.S. citizen, and she makes a gift to you who is a U.S. citizen, that is a gift from a foreign person. If your brother and your sister, who are not U.S. citizens, give you a gift, that's also a gift from a foreign person. Now, it seems odd, but the rule was adopted without an understanding of how many dual nationals live really outside the U.S. Mutual funds. A mutual fund owned at a Fidelity account in Boston will be treated differently than a similar fund owned in Athens. And it will be tax disfavored with certain compliance obligations. Retirement savings. If you set up a 401k in the United States, that's a tax-favored retirement investment account, or an individual retirement account, or a Roth IRA in the U.S. Those are designed to encourage retirement savings. If you set up a 401k in all but name here in Greece, it will not enjoy tax-favored status in the United States. Pension plan contributions. Typically, a pension plan contribution is deductible. The employer's contribution is not added to your income, and your contribution is deducted from your income. That's not the case for a U.S. citizen living outside the United States. Now, we have made a point with the service that we believe the Treasury has the power to create transition rules that would moderate some of these disparate treatments. But unfortunately, the law is written as it is. Participation in corporations or foreign partnerships, again, require different reporting. And the fact is they create many traps for the unwary. I said to you earlier that the Form 1040 is simply a summary, and everything else that goes with the return, the schedules and the other forms, are all dictated by other facts of your financial existence here outside the United States. So, for example, if you and your brother are both U.S. citizens and you create a souvlaki store here in Athens, a souvlaki restaurant here in Athens, and you create a corporation to own the restaurant, to operate it, that Greek corporation is now something called a controlled foreign corporation. Why is it a controlled foreign corporation? Because it's owned more than 50% by U.S. persons. And it is subject to a wholly different reporting and tax regime. Now, a word to the wise. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. And unfortunately, for most people, tax is an area that they glaze over. They look at it, and then they got to deal with Greek tax, and then all of a sudden somebody tells them, you got to deal with U.S. tax. And then they hear all this stuff, they go pick up the regulations, they go pick up the instructions, they read 3 lines, and they go, oh my God, what is this saying? And I've seen so many, just totally confused. So for many people in your position, it's not a lack of intelligence, it's not a lack of sophistication. In many cases, it's simply, you're not doing this every day. You're trying to read jargon, and you're trying to read legalese, and you're trying to read tax speak. So in many ways, it's not something people just want to deal with. A lot of lawyers don't want to deal with it either. So that's why I use the term blind. It's not because people are really blind. And so somebody knows a little bit, maybe far more dangerous, because you're not going to know. So U.S. tax compliance requires a lot more than simply plugging numbers into a tax preparation program. If you don't know what forms to file, then you're not going to create the correct forms. You may plug the right numbers into a 1040 or not, but the fact is you may not know what other documents need to be there. So what I give people is a due diligence list of questions when there are lots of people who are very qualified to do these returns. What you need to do is make sure that you do your due diligence in terms of who these people might be. You want to ask, do they have any formal U.S. tax training, especially in regard to the taxation of U.S. citizens living outside the United States? So you want to know they've got some formal training. They may have a PTIN, a Preparer's Tax Identification Number, but that doesn't mean they have any training. Can you serve as my power of attorney on a U.S. Form 2848? The Internal Revenue Service has an enabler, a document called a Form 4828, which allows certain persons, lawyers, accountants, and other tax professionals, to be appointed by you to be their U.S. tax representatives, which gives that person the right to talk directly to the IRS about your tax case, to retrieve your tax information and information from the IRS website, and to otherwise represent you before the Internal Revenue Service. Last question, have you handled an IRS examination of a U.S. tax return filed by a U.S. citizen living outside the United States? I mean, have they actually had to confront the IRS when they're examining a return to, in fact, know what the service is looking for, how it deals with particular foreign source income? Remember, your Greek tax return is not relevant to a U.S. tax return. You can't just translate it from the Greek return to the U.S. return, because the U.S. requires you to report your income as required under the Internal Revenue Code. The numbers will come from your Greek return, but how they're translated onto the U.S. return can be either good for you or not. And what you want is the best possible translation. So ask those questions. Now, you can visit our website at www.flotco.com. You can click on our Facebook page at the bottom of our homepage. And if you like us, you can receive periodic updates on U.S. tax and financial account compliance, news on IRS announcements, and other useful information on U.S. tax. We have a special website called U.S. Taxed Abroad. I think it's, all of a sudden I've forgotten, it's called, I think Citizens Taxed Abroad or something like that, which you'll find on our website. And we do work here in Athens. I mean, we're not the only people who can do this for you, so I don't want to give you that impression at all. I just want you to make sure you do good due diligence. I am in Athens every other month, and obviously in today's world with Skype, email, telephone, fax, the time difference between here in Athens, between Washington or Arlington and Athens tends to work generally in the Greek favor, because you guys are home at night at 11, 12, whatever, and we're still in the office working away at 4 or 5 in the afternoon. So the difference isn't that big. A lot of the questions can be answered, often in a half-an-hour Skype call. We can really explain what has to be done and then sharing the information. All of our tax documents are sent through a secure email system, which we've set up with in our own system.